The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the midnight stillness of the roadside eatery. An exhausted server moved between the empty tables, unaware that destiny was preparing to challenge her resolve. When a tattooed man's grip tore through her clothing, mockery echoed through the space until another kind of quiet descended. He had failed to notice the other observers present. Welcome to Hidden Narratives. Before we start, please share your location in the comments and subscribe to our channel. Every comment, donation, and membership supports our mission to deliver meaningful stories to your screen. Maya Tuna pulled the night shift at Rusty's Diner, a highway stop situated beyond Denver's outskirts. Though only 26, she bore the weight of years beyond her time. Her father's financial obligations had consumed her aspirations, trapping her in extended work hours and sleepless nights. Despite this, she offered warmth to customers even when exhaustion made her hands shake. Her regular patrons consisted mainly of truckers and neighborhood folks who recognized her gentle nature. They left whatever tips they could manage, never sufficient to lighten her load, but always enough to remind her of her worth. Tonight, the neon sign flickered weakly against the tempest beyond the glass. Rain traced irregular patterns down the windows. Maya rested against the counter, pulling her hair back, attempting to dispel the heaviness of another interminable evening. Unknown to her, a group of Hell's Angels sat quietly in the distant corner, eating peacefully and sharing soft conversations among themselves. They hadn't come seeking conflict. They weren't trying to draw attention, but fate has a tendency to draw concealed protectors into the light. The entrance swung wide with a rush of stormy air. A man stepped inside. Derek, somewhere in his 30s, with broad build and tattoos spiraling up his arms like twisted metal. His arrival altered the room's energy. Maya sensed the change immediately, though she attempted to maintain her welcoming expression. He brought with him an aura that wasn't merely oppressive, it was cutting, restless, and reckless. His heavy boots scraped against the flooring as he dragged himself toward the service counter. "Coffee?" he demanded, flinging a wrinkled bill as if it were a projectile. Maya acknowledged with a nod, carefully filling the dark brew and placing it before him with quiet dignity. Derek grinned mockingly, his gaze crawling across her form as though she were merely another possession he believed he could claim. From their corner table, one of the motorcyclists lifted his head, detecting the atmospheric shift. Yet for the moment, silence prevailed. Maya had encountered Derek's type previously. Some carried loneliness, others bore emotional wounds, but this particular man seemed to take satisfaction in the chaos he created, as if others were destined to be swept away by it. Maya pivoted to refill the coffee pot when Derek's voice sliced through the atmosphere once more. "Hey, beautiful," he called, his words saturated with sarcasm. "What brings a woman like you to waste her existence in a place like this?" She managed a courteous smile, responding softly, "Simply earning a living. Everyone needs to survive." Yet his smirk expanded, becoming more vicious. "Or perhaps you enjoy having men watch you while you serve dessert and beverages. Is that it?" The restaurant atmosphere grew strained. Several locals shifted nervously, averting their eyes from his stare. Maya's pulse quickened, but she refused to show weakness. She had mastered the art of preserving her self-respect during such moments, even when her interior trembled. Derek moved closer, murmuring something meant only for her ears, words she chose not to repeat. However, her expression revealed the damage those words inflicted. She retreated, forcing down her emotions. The Hell's Angels in their booth shared meaningful looks. Their leader, Mason, focused his gaze intently but remained motionless. For the present, Maya was selecting silence, and they honored that decision, though the evening was nowhere near its conclusion. Maya's work period continued slowly. Rain hammered the glass while thunder rumbled in the distance. The bikers stayed quiet, their presence nearly undetectable, until Derek decided to push his boundaries further. He slammed his mug against the surface. "Coffee's gone cold. Are you incompetent or simply dim-witted?" The verbal attack stung, yet Maya calmly reached for the coffee pot. She topped off his cup, whispering, "My apologies for that." Derek's laughter emerged sharp and harsh. "Apologies? You believe saying sorry makes up for being worthless?" The room tensed further. A truck driver in the rear began to stand, but Mason's subtle head movement kept him seated. Mason's attention remained fixed on Derek, his patience holding steady. He understood that conflicts burned most intensely when they reached their climax. Maya concentrated on the counter surface, determined not to let her tears escape. She possessed inner strength. She truly did. However, evenings like this one wore away at her spirit until she felt like fragile glass on the verge of breaking. Derek appeared to derive pleasure from applying additional pressure to those fractures. The clock had passed midnight when the diner settled into an uncomfortable calm. Derek's taunts had decreased in frequency, yet his eyes continued tracking Maya, filled with hunger and malice. Maya collected dishes, moving to clean a nearby table. Her shirt sleeve shifted slightly, exposing a pale scar along her forearm. Derek observed this, his smile twisting into something more sinister. "Appears you've had men give you education before," he mocked. The comment struck Maya like a physical blow, stopping her movement entirely. She experienced the burden of shame she had never requested. Still, she straightened her posture, whispered, "Please refrain," and turned to leave. Yet Derek hadn't finished. He extended his arms suddenly and roughly, seizing her wrist. The room inhaled sharply, dishes rattling in her shaking hands. Maya broke free, whispering once more, "Please stop." Mason's chair groaned as he shifted forward. His companion's gazes sharpened. The storm beyond howled more intensely as if nature itself sensed the building tension. This was the moment Derek should have withdrawn. Instead, he selected violence. With one reckless movement, Derek grabbed at Maya's shirt. The delicate material ripped along the seam. Sharp intakes of breath filled the restaurant. Shock, rage, disbelief. Maya froze, humiliation washing over her like flames. Her trembling fingers attempted to hold the damaged fabric against her body. Tears clouded her sight. For that instant, she felt completely vulnerable, robbed not only of her clothing but of her self-worth. Derek's laughter rang out, his voice rough and merciless. "Now we're getting somewhere." However, his amusement was short-lived. The sound of furniture scraping across flooring silenced the entire space. Mason rose, his broad frame creating a shadow beneath the diner's neon illumination. His leather vest displayed the unmistakable symbol, the Hell's Angels. Derek's expression of satisfaction wavered. He glanced at the group now standing. Their presence resembled thunder given human form. Maya's breathing was labored. Yet for the first time that evening, she wasn't shaking in isolation. The room's dynamic had transformed. The predators had taken notice. And the aggressor wasn't the most powerful creature present. Mason remained silent initially. He simply stood, his heavy footwear echoing across the tiles as he approached the counter. The remaining bikers rose behind him, quiet and united. Their vests bore the red and white symbol that commanded respect throughout America. Derek's false courage flickered. His laughter fractured under the pressure building from all directions. He hadn't recognized who he was ridiculing, who he was degrading before their eyes. Maya clutched her torn garment, her breathing uneven. She sensed eyes upon her, but this time they weren't mocking. They were defensive, unwavering. Mason halted just feet from Derek. His tone was controlled, measured, yet carried the strength of command. "Lower your hands." The diner achieved complete stillness. Even the rainfall appeared to hesitate, suspended in the atmosphere. Derek swallowed with difficulty, forcing a smirk. "Take it easy, old-timer. I was simply enjoying myself." Mason's jaw muscles tightened. His men remained motionless, yet their presence was thunder awaiting the lightning strike. "Your entertainment has concluded." Derek attempted another laugh, but it emerged hollow. He scanned the diner, seeking support and finding none. Every set of eyes glared back with revulsion. Maya spoke softly, her voice shaking, "Please, just end this." However, Derek wasn't prepared to retreat. His ego, wounded by the confrontation, made him foolish. He expanded his chest, leaning toward Mason with a sneer. "You believe that jacket makes you royalty? This is my business with her. Mind your own affairs." Mason tilted his head slightly. His gaze never wavered from Derek's. His composure was more frightening than fury. "It ceased being solely your business with her the instant you damaged her clothing," Mason stated, his voice quiet but sharp enough to slice steel. Derek scoffed, though his hands shook slightly against the counter. He hadn't anticipated resistance. He certainly hadn't expected it from men who possessed the kind of influence Mason and his group wielded. The tempest outside split open with lightning, and inside, another storm prepared to break. Maya stepped backward, caught between fear and an unusual sense of security. She had spent years convinced that no one would ever intervene on her behalf, that she had to face her struggles alone. Now, men she'd never conversed with stood like barriers around her. Derek attempted to hide his nervousness with swagger. He leaned back, extending his arms wide. "What? Are you going to strike me in front of witnesses?" Mason didn't react. He took one deliberate step closer. The air grew thick, heavy with unspoken menace. "This isn't about striking you," Mason said, his tone controlled. It's about instructing you in respect. The impact of those words hit harder than any physical blow. Derek's smirk disappeared, his eyes shifting to the exit, to the bikers flanking Mason, then back to Maya still gripping her shirt. For the first time that evening, Derek saw his reflection not as a hunter, but as a coward, trapped by his own brutality. The tension climaxed when Derek abruptly pushed his seat backward, the legs shrieking against the flooring. He stood tall but trembling slightly. "Stay back," he snapped, though his voice shook. "I don't follow commands from motorcycle riders." Mason's companions remained silent, sculptures carved from devotion. Mason's eyes narrowed, his stillness more menacing than any outcry. "You don't follow commands from bikers," Mason said deliberately. "However, tonight, you'll accept one from me. Offer her your apologies." Derek laughed anxiously, his eyes darting once more to Maya. "She doesn't require my apologies. She welcomed the attention." The statement hung like toxin in the air. Gasps swept through the diner. Maya's eyes filled with fresh tears, not from frailty, but from exhaustion of bearing so much cruelty in silence. Mason's jaw clenched. He had offered Derek an opportunity, and Derek had discarded it. The room prepared itself. Because when patience expires, consequences commence. Mason moved suddenly, not with violence, but with commanding presence. His palm struck the counter beside Derek's cup, the noise cracking like a rifle shot. Derek jerked backward, stumbling slightly. Mason leaned in, his voice low and dangerous. "You don't get to degrade women in my presence. Not her. Not anyone." The diner held its breath. Derek's face reddened, torn between terror and arrogance. He opened his mouth to respond, but Mason's hand pressed against his chest, restraining him. Not attacking, but controlling him with authority. "Look around," Mason said, nodding toward the room. "Not a single person here respects you. You think power comes from destroying others. That isn't power. That's frailty." Derek's fists clenched, but his courage was dissolving. He glanced at the other bikers, silent, immovable guardians, and understood the odds were not favorable. For the first time, Derek's smirk vanished entirely. Maya stood motionless, her breathing unsteady. In Mason's words, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: protection. Derek made one final attempt at bravado, spitting his words like poison. "You think you're some kind of rescuer? She's merely a server. Who cares?" Maya's heart dropped at the insult. However, Mason didn't waver. His eyes burned with quiet rage. "That mere server works harder than you ever have," Mason said firmly. "She appears day after day carrying burdens you couldn't endure for a week. And you treat her like refuse. That ends tonight." The entire diner seemed to press in at those words. The trucker in the corner nodded slightly in quiet agreement. Even strangers felt the truth in Mason's voice. Derek, cornered and stripped of his false protection, lowered his gaze for the first time. "Say it," Mason commanded. "Say you're sorry." Derek hesitated, pride strangling him, but the weight of the room pressed down heavier than any fist. Finally, through gritted teeth, he muttered, "Sorry." It wasn't sufficient. Not yet. Mason didn't accept the mumbled apology. He shook his head slowly, his voice calm but cutting. "Not to me. To her." The silence stretched thick and choking. Derek turned his head toward Maya, his face contorted with humiliation. "I'm sorry," he forced out, his tone bitter but audible. Maya's lips quivered. 4 years, she had endured insults, inappropriate touching, cruel laughter, and no one had ever demanded respect on her behalf. Tears gathered, but she held her chin high, refusing to let Derek witness her breaking. Mason stepped back slightly, giving Derek space but not freedom. The biker's towering presence ensured that. "Now leave," Mason said simply. Derek hesitated, then grabbed his jacket from the stool, his eyes scanning the room one final time. However, the faces staring back weren't intimidated. They were determined. He pushed through the door into the storm, the bell above it chiming like a gavel sealing his judgment. Inside, the silence remained, but now it felt lighter. Maya stood frozen, one hand still clutching her damaged shirt. The adrenaline hadn't left her system yet. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a drum that wouldn't quiet. Mason turned to her, his voice softening. "Are you all right?" Maya nodded quickly, though tears spilled down her cheeks. I believe so." One of Mason's men removed his leather jacket and gently placed it around her shoulders. The heavy warmth of it made her feel secure, protected. For the first time all evening, she breathed deeply. "You didn't need to," she began. However, Mason interrupted her with a shake of his head. No woman should face that kind of battle alone, he said. The words struck her like sunlight piercing storm clouds. She had never expected protection from strangers, least of all men who carried the reputation the Hells Angels possessed. However, in this moment, they weren't outlaws. They were protectors. And for Maya, that meant everything. The diner slowly resumed normal activity. Dishes clinked once more. Utensils scraped. Conversations resumed in soft murmurs. Yet the atmosphere had changed. Respect now lingered in the air, directed not at Mason and his crew, but at Maya. The trucker, who had nearly intervened, tipped his hat toward her, a small gesture of solidarity. A young couple at a booth smiled at her with quiet admiration. Maya pulled the jacket closer around herself, feeling its weight not as a burden but as armor. She glanced at Mason, his expression calm, his eyes steady but kind. "Thank you," she whispered, voice breaking. Mason nodded once. "Just keep standing tall. That's all the gratitude we need." Maya had spent years believing strength meant enduring in silence. Tonight she discovered that sometimes strength also meant accepting help when it arrived, and that help could come from the most unexpected sources. Even leather-wearing riders who most of the world feared. As the rain subsided outside, the bikers settled back into their booth. Mason raised his coffee cup toward Maya in a silent toast, a gesture of respect rather than power. She smiled faintly, returning to her duties. Though this time her steps carried a different weight, dignity instead of defeat. She glanced out the window, catching her reflection in the glass. For the first time in years, she didn't see a fragile girl trying to survive. She saw a woman who had been tested, humiliated, but still standing with people who wouldn't let her fall. Her scarred arm no longer appeared as a mark of weakness. Tonight, it looked like proof she had survived. Maya refilled a cup at a nearby table, her voice more steady. Customers looked at her with something new in their eyes, not pity, not dismissal, but genuine respect. Derek had attempted to strip her dignity. Instead, his cruelty had revealed it, and that was the justice Mason had promised. When her shift finally concluded, Maya lingered by the door. The storm outside had calmed into a drizzle, the air carrying the fresh scent of rain on asphalt. Mason and his crew were preparing to depart, leather jackets creaking, helmets in hand. Before stepping out, Mason paused beside her. "You keep fighting, Maya," he said gently. "You possess more strength than you understand." Her eyes glistened. "I don't feel strong." Mason smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes from knowing too many battles. "That's because strength doesn't always feel like strength. Most of the time it feels like surviving. And you've been doing that your entire life." Maya's throat tightened. She wanted to say more, but words failed. Instead, she simply nodded, holding his jacket tighter around her shoulders. With a final nod, Mason and his men stepped into the night, engines roaring like thunder fading into the distance. Maya stood in the doorway, the weight of their protection still wrapped around her. The following morning, Maya returned to the diner for another shift. The torn shirt had been replaced, but the memory of last night lingered like smoke. She expected whispers, perhaps judgment. Instead, she was greeted with warmth. Customers welcomed her with kind smiles, subtle nods of respect. The young couple from the booth returned, leaving a generous tip with a small note scribbled on the napkin, "You're stronger than you know." Maya folded the note carefully, slipping it into her pocket like a secret piece of armor. The diner felt different now, not just a place where she worked, but a place where her dignity had been defended and restored. And though Mason and his crew were gone, their presence still echoed in the air, as if the walls themselves remembered the stand they had taken for her. Maya realized something profound. Sometimes angels didn't have wings. Sometimes they wore leather and rode motorcycles. That night after her shift, Maya walked home through quiet streets. The rain had stopped, the moon glowing above like a witness to her transformation. She replayed Mason's words in her mind, "Strength doesn't always feel like strength." For the first time, she allowed herself to believe it. Every scar, every burden, every tear she had carried was not proof of weakness, it was proof of survival. She paused at her small apartment door, the silence of the night wrapping around her. A faint smile touched her lips. Last night, a man had tried to strip her dignity. Instead, strangers had shown her she was worth defending. That truth would stay with her longer than any scar. Maya turned the key, stepping into her modest home. However, her heart carried something new, hope. Hope that even in a world where cruelty lurked, kindness and protection could still rise from unexpected places. Weeks later, Maya still worked long hours at Rusty's diner. Life didn't magically change. The bills were still there, the exhaustion still heavy. However, inside, something was different. She no longer lowered her eyes when men mocked her. She no longer believed she was invisible. Whenever fear crept in, she remembered that night, the jacket draped over her shoulders, the voice that told her she was stronger than she knew. And she carried that truth like armor. Maya knew she couldn't control the storms that entered her life, but she could stand through them taller each time. As she poured coffee for another weary traveler, she caught her reflection in the window once again. This time, she didn't just see herself. She saw every woman who had ever been underestimated, humiliated, or silenced, still standing, still unbroken. And for the first time, Maya smiled at the reflection staring back. Maya Turner's story reminds us that dignity is never weakness, and strength often rises in silence until it's seen. Sometimes protectors come when least expected. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and press the bell icon so more people can feel inspired to stand.